In NecroVision, you play as Wolverine fighting against Germans and demons for vampires during alternate history World War I. That's legitimately the plot of this game. I'm not sure how I didn't hear of this game, and most likely you haven't either. So in this analysis, I'm going to be covering the hidden gem, NecroVision. Hey everyone, Jarek the Gaming Dragon here. I'd just like to give a quick thanks to everyone watching this channel. This channel has been growing pretty rapidly over the last 6 months or so, and it couldn't without you guys. It's become apparent that people really do like watching my videos, which is nice to me because I put a lot of effort into them, and I'm kind of proud of them in a way. So I really do mean it when I say it means a lot to me that people enjoy watching my videos. If you're subscribed to this channel, consider clicking that bell, otherwise you won't get notified by YouTube that I'm posting anything. And if you aren't subscribed to this channel, maybe consider doing that too. But yes, NecroVision. I'm actually going to be covering NecroVision and NecroVision Lost Company in this video. Lost Company is a sequel, technically a prequel, but it plays more like a big expansion, so it doesn't make much sense to give it its whole video on its own, so it's just going to be condensed into this one. NecroVision was made by a studio called the Farm 51. You might know them because they're behind the recent flop that is World War III, but they did make some other decent games, like say Get Even and Painkiller Hell and Damnation. Now I had actually seen NecroVision occasionally on YouTube channels in the past and thought it looked interesting, maybe I'll play it, and then put it into the back of my mind where I promptly forgot about it. Well, recently I was just googling mediocre first-person shooters, and I came across NecroVision. I figured this would come across either some very bad games that would make for interesting videos, or some hidden gems that would also make for interesting videos that I actually enjoyed playing, unlike torturing myself with the bad ones. Thankfully, I really enjoyed NecroVision a lot more than I thought I was going to. NecroVision was only released on PC, and it's pretty cheap nowadays. You can get both NecroVision and NecroVision Lost Company for $10. As I previously explained, the story is all over the place. So much so that I don't want to explain it in this video because I really don't want to spoil anything. I feel like you just have to experience it on your own by playing the game. So again, I'm not spoiling anything, but I will explain small things along the way while I'm talking about the gameplay. The protagonist is an American soldier during World War I by the name of Simon Buckner. It's a little bit strange that you're an American soldier because you only ever see British soldiers in this game. Your main character has a bit of a southern twang. Not a full-on southern accent that can grate on your nerves, but more so like some neighbor in the south that would loan you his toaster if yours died. He just seems like a genuine southern dude. The voice acting as a whole is actually pretty decent in this game. It's not the best thing I've ever heard, but it's definitely far from low-budget bad. The writing, on the other hand, can be rather cheesy, but the cheesiness is actually part of this game's charm. It's not cheesy in a bad way that makes it kind of awkward to watch around other people. It's cheesy where you just want to keep watching to see what the hell is going to happen. Although I will say the cutscenes are presented in this sort of almost slideshow artistic way with a bit of an exposition dump. And on one hand, you want to just skip the cutscene because it's a little bit boring, but on the other hand, you're interested in what's going on and you kind of need to know what's happening so you don't. As for the game itself, it was only ever released on PC, and in my experience actually runs pretty well. I know other people had problems with it, but for me, as long as I didn't turn VSync on, it ran perfectly fine without having to do any other fixes. If you do have VSync on and you fire a fully automatic weapon, your frame rate will tank, so I recommend keeping that off. The game came out in 2009, and for 2009 this looks pretty good. It still holds up because the art style is very weird and unique. The best analogy I can put to this is, say, the World War I sections in The Darkness 1. The one complaint I do have graphically is that the FOV seems to be perfectly fine at 100, which is actually what I prefer, but the weapon FOV seems to be really not good. It doesn't seem to scale with the FOV the game currently has. It looks like it's more around 80. If you don't know what I mean by weapon FOV, I mean how big the guns are in your screen, or more specifically, how close they look to your face. Another example of this is that when you increase the FOV in Far Cry 3 and 4, the FOV gets bigger, but the guns don't ever get further away from you. So you have a big FOV and the guns are right in your face, and this has always been a huge pet peeve of mine. Thankfully, NecroVision's not quite as bad as Far Cry 3, as the weapon FOV is closer to 55, which is just horrendous, and this one's closer to about 80, so you can ignore it pretty quickly, but it's still there. Other than that, I have no complaints. Gameplay-wise, this game starts out more as a standard first-person shooter. You don't have any crazy powers or any of that. You get bolt-action rifles. You can dual-wield with some interesting dual-wield combinations like a bayonet and a Luger, or some dynamite or a grenade, things like that, but nothing too crazy. The gunplay at first might feel a little bit awkward as headshots are incredibly important. If you shoot someone in the chest, it won't kill them, but it will knock them down, making follow-up shots more difficult as they'll probably end up falling behind cover or something like that. You can, however, kick them to knock them down and then get an easier shot because you're already close up. Walk up to them while on the ground, shoot them in the head, and they're dead. Getting headshots isn't as easy as you may think at first. Dual-wielding, the guns aren't quite as accurate as if you're just firing one. And if you're firing a bolt action, well, the enemy's movements are so erratic that it's kind of difficult to hit their head. Thankfully, if you're up close, you can kick them, which will knock them down, making an easy headshot. These are all things that feel awkward at first, but very quickly you start kind of getting into the flow of the game, and it's not really that difficult. At first, the enemies are just simple Germans, but then a vampire face starts talking to you from the sky. I'm not kidding you, this is alternate history World War I, and it's very weird, and then you end up starting to fight German zombies. Very quickly you start getting introduced to more paranormal enemies, and this is a good thing, otherwise fighting the same Germans and zombies the entire game would get boring rather quick. It also just raises the whole what the fuck is going on factor. During this whole time you have an extra energy bar called your adrenaline, which you can use to go during slow motion, which again also makes headshots easier to do. During the first half of this game, the progression is very similar to that of any other first-person shooter. You get different and better guns as it continues on. All these guns are very satisfying to use. It's broken up with some unique boss battles every here and then that are similar to, say, something in Painkiller, but for the most part, progression is, again, like your standard first-person shooter, up until you beat one of the bosses, and you get this glaive that turns you into Wolverine. This glaive is called a Shadow Hand, and you'll be sent to the vampire world to use this to cut up enemies, which will give you more abilities, like the ability to throw a big fireball that explodes, or use it to shoot dart things at the enemies, or use it to freeze them, or you can dual wield it with another gun, and just use a vampire-like shotgun, or weapons like that. At this point the game just goes crazy. It was already very weird before this, it continues to get even weirder. As I said, all these things are linked together within the plot in ways that make sense. It's just a crazy plot. I'm not going to spoil anything, and I really want you to play this on your own. One of my favorite things about this Shadow Hand is that if you sprint and melee with it, you just send enemies flying. They ragdoll across the entire map. And since this game uses the Havoc physics engine, you get that glorious ragdoll that you all know and love. Numerous times throughout this game, you'll end up getting into a mech that kind of separate things, but you can always get out of it if you don't want to use it, or if it explodes. You also, after a certain point, will end up riding a fucking dragon, and then basically fighting Satan himself. Like I said, this game goes everywhere, and arguably its biggest strength is that it never really stays too much of the same for too long. It's constantly throwing new things at you, but in a way that still feels like the same game. I never complained when it mixed something up. Instead, I wanted to continue playing it because it was actually fun and engaging. But I do have one complaint about this game. That is that for the last level or so, it just pours constant enemies at you non-stop, and it really feels like they were padding the time out in the game. I found myself for the entire last level just saying, I just want to get to the final boss so I can beat the game, instead of fighting the same enemies time and time again. So the last level or so does tend to drag on, but the rest of the game is fantastic, and the final boss is also good himself. I really wish I could talk about the ending to this game, but again, I don't want to spoil anything, so I won't. What I will say is that you get different endings depending on the difficulty you choose. Normal is probably the most acceptable ending, so if you want to just play the game on normal difficulty, don't be afraid to, and then just go watch the other endings on YouTube. You can do that. That's what I did. The last little note I want to make about this game is that, as I mentioned, you end up riding a dragon. You're pretty much controlling the dragon the whole time, however, it's in first person and the FOV feels really small. This becomes very awkward and honestly gave me a headache. You can't make it third person, and this is all you see the whole time. Trust me, this is going to hurt your head, and if you're one of those people that gets sick from playing video games, you are going to get sick very easily. Thankfully, I'm not one of those people. The concept is amazing though. You're riding a dragon fighting demons in a vampire world. What part of this do you not want? And I don't think I explained it enough, this game really does have a lot of enemy variety. From standard zombies, to Germans, to weird demon dog things, to demons, there's just everything you could really want or not want is in this game. Again, variety is its biggest strength. Nothing is ever the same for too long aside from that last level. From here I can talk about NecroVision Lost Company. It's a sequel, but it's technically a prequel. And it's more of an expansion, although a pretty long one, lasting about 4 hours compared to the original game's 8 or so. You're going to be getting a lot of playtime out of these games, and they're also going to be replayable. Something I forgot to mention is that after you beat the base game, you can play the entire game again with the Shadow Glove, instead of getting it about halfway through. As I mentioned though, Lost Company is a prequel, and instead of playing on the Ally side, you play as one of the main antagonists from the first game, which is a very interesting concept that I've always wished more games would do. It reminds me of, say, Half-Life Opposing Force. Without spoiling anything, the actual progression is more or less the same as the first one, starting as a World War I game and then eventually getting the Shadow Hand and then continuing on. But there's a lot of new content in this one that wasn't in the first one. One of my complaints about the first game is that it seemed to limit you on ammo a little too much. Not so much that you have to scrounge around all the time, but you will frequently run out of ammo with certain guns. Lost Company doesn't seem to do this, and it seems to give you plenty of ammo so you can really go ham with the guns that you like. It also includes some new guns, like the bar. The first game also had a vampire flamethrower that I found and promptly was able to use for a total of about 30 seconds before running out of ammo with and never finding again. Whereas in Lost Company you can use this a lot more, which is nice because I always wanted to. Aside from the crazy plot, there's not really a whole lot more in depth to go with Lost Company. It is more or less an expansion. It does what the first game did, but a lot better. One of the biggest improvements from the first game to Lost Company is just the general feeling of atmosphere. You find yourself fighting in the same sort of environment throughout certain levels, like say a broken down church with nurses that want to kill you. The first game on the other hand sort of felt like linear corridors just for the sake of throwing enemies at you, whereas this one really does feel like they put more effort into the environment. It's a bit odd to say this because the art style is amazing in both of these games and really hold the games up. But purely from a map design standpoint, the second one is much better than the first. It also doesn't seem to pad your time as much as the first one. You find yourself in entirely new environments with new enemies and new guns and fighting new bosses, you know, the stuff you should expect from an expansion. Although you do occasionally see yourself cross over to maps that you saw in the first game, and this was actually a good thing. It's like when you see Gordon in Blue Shift or Opposing Force. I think the big takeaway from this game and the expansion is that it's not a game that holds itself up on the gimmick alone. Sure, the universe is insane and that should grab your attention. You're fighting demons in World War I for vampires with a glaive that turns you into Wolverine. What part about this is not insane and awesome to actually just want to play? But the more important factor is that the game is also very fun to play and engaging, and it constantly changes, and it's never just a boring, samey game. I don't use the phrase hidden gem ever, but this is one of the few times where it actually applies. This game only came out on PC, and from what I can tell it didn't really get any marketing, so it sort of just fell underground and not many people really know about it. And that's a shame, because it's a really fun game. I enjoyed this game more than I enjoyed any other game over the last year or so. So if you're wanting to play this game and its expansion, I would highly recommend it. You can get both NecroVision and NecroVision Lost Company in a bundle for only $10 on Steam. They're very affordable. You're going to be getting a lot of playtime out of this. But that about sums up this video on NecroVision. It was kind of difficult phrasing this in a way that doesn't spoil anything, so pardon me for the lack of structure compared to my usual content. A lot of you did seem to enjoy me playing this game over on Twitch though, so if you want to follow me on Twitch, my Twitch is twitch.tv/Jarek4GamingDragon. And if you want to support me farther, you can either subscribe on Twitch or give me help over on Patreon, patreon.com/Jarek4. Again, thank all of you for supporting this channel. It's really nice to see it start growing, and I will see you next time.